are finally coming to the end of these wonderful 3 days of SSS that we have been having. For at least the 4 of us, that is Commander V, Anjan, and we who have been associated with the center from its very beginning, 40 years of CESP also means 40 years of our association with CESP. Of all the effort that we have put in virtually through a lifetime, all the passion, all the emotion that we have invested in the center, a few drops have obviously gone to each one of you. There is of course an asymmetry as far as you are concerned. The influences on you are many, including your own agency in your own formation. But as far as we are concerned, you are all that we have to show if someone asks us, what did you do during your life? so in a sense, it's very interesting that seeing you in the aggregate here, one is as it were confronted by one's own life, confronted with one's life's work. And it's a deeply satisfying experience. I think it's quite exhilarating. This is the time for quoting Tagore. And in fact, I was telling Utsa this morning that I want to also quote Tagore, Ja dekhechi jaha pechi turana tarni. Now, which means it's incomparable, whatever I've seen and got received. One of the pleasures of being in CESP is not only that we have had such brilliant students as you, but also that we have had a wonderful set of colleagues, particularly outstandingly brilliant colleagues. Dan, Professor Ronnie Bhaburi, there was nobody in the entire world who knew more macroeconomics. Dan, Professor Anjan Mukherjee, there was nobody, mind you, in the entire world who knew more of general equilibrium analysis. And therefore, we had this great advantage that if you are faced with some kind of a problem in any of these areas, you simply walk into your neighbor's room with hands in your pockets and find out what was the problem. When I wrote this book, The Value of Money, which actually came out in 2009, it had a very long gestation period. I started writing it in 1995. I wrote and rewrote and so on. I remember roughly around 1997, when Anjan was the dean, going to him and saying, look, this is the argument that I propose to put forward in a book I'm writing. What do you think of it? So he thought about it with the lesson that sounds all right. So I went ahead with great confidence and wrote my book. Today what I propose to do is really to go back a bit to that book in developing what I'm going to say. This is my last chance to give a lecture to you. So I make full use of it. When I asked Arun, what should I talk about? Arun said that, look, you just talk about your own development as an economist and so on. So when I look back upon, let's say, my tryst with the subject of economics, the thing that actually strikes me is a deep sense of dissatisfaction. I really feel at the end of, almost at the end of a working life, that I think economists by and large have been barking up the wrong tree. That basically what they have concentrated upon is not necessarily what is the most important subject to concentrate upon, even if we ask the same questions as they are asking. Ramprasad was raising the point yesterday that we are asking the wrong questions. But even if you ask the same questions as economists traditionally have been asking, then I think we are nonetheless barking up the wrong tree. Starting from the days of Adam Smith, Invisible Hand and so on, the focus of economics has been to really look at how markets function in order to explain the operation of the capitalist economy. Let's make this one very important. I think, irrespective of the school of thought that we are talking about in economics, whether it is Warrenian, whether it is Keynesian, whether it is classical, I think the reading of the centrality of the functioning of the market is actually what I have very deep disquiet about. Let me try and explain why. You see, if you are looking at the functioning of the market, suppose we talk about a money-using economy. In that case, the set of markets we talk about must also include the money market. When whenever we are talking about a set of prices at which the market clears, and this is true in the Eurasian tradition, even in the classical tradition, though one talks about equilibrium prices, which are independent of demand and supply, when you talk about market prices, for which the prices of production or the equilibrium prices are the center of gravity, those market prices must be ones at which demand and supply are equal. And as a result, those market prices, in a certain sense, are of course determined by demand and supply. And the market price must be one at which, therefore, whether we are talking the Eurasian system or even the Ricardian system, but discussing the market prices within the Ricardian system, must be one at which the excess demand is zero. Now, this presupposes, of course, for a meaningful set of prices, that all the excess demands must be downward sloping curves with respect to price. And if we are talking on the money market, for a given supply of money, that would mean that the demand for money should fall as the price of money rises, and the demand for money should rise when the price of money falls. In other words, the demand for money must behave like the demand for anything else with respect to its price. Now that it certainly would do, as long as money is not held as a form of wealth. I keep teaching this to my students. So, as long as money is not held in the form of wealth. Starting from the days of Hume right down to Alfred Marshall, there was this view that if money is held only for circulating commodities, and of course if the amount of money that is required is something which is simply a constant times the value of the commodities to be circulated, then invariably you would find a downward sloping demand curve for money. There's no question about it. As the price of money falls, which means all commodity prices rise, you need more money for circulating, therefore demand for money rises. So the demand curve for money certainly is downward sloping with respect to its price, if you think of money only as a medium of circulation, and that too with a constant relationship with the value of commodities to be circulated. So the moment you think of money as a form of holding wealth, and of course it is absurd, logically contradictory to think of money as a medium of circulation. That means I sell something, I get some money, I keep it for a day, next day I go and buy something. I mean, the moment you think of money as a medium of circulation, it's already implicit that it is a bit of a store of value, and therefore a form in which wealth is held even for a day. So if it can be held for a day, it can certainly be held for more than a day, and therefore to say that money is only a medium of circulation but not a form of holding wealth is contradictory. Once you think of money as a form of holding wealth, however, then a problem arises, because suppose the price of money falls, you may expect that the price of money will fall even more, in which case you may not actually demand more money, because then your expectations enter into the picture. Now, if your expectation enters into the picture, then you don't necessarily get a downward sloping demand curve for money. All efforts, literally all efforts, at incorporating money into a system of prices determined in the market are efforts which are logically, I mean, as long as those efforts do not follow the simple Marshallian track, but actually talk in terms of money as a form of wealth, all such efforts are logically contradictory. And as a matter of fact, if you take real balance effect and all kinds of things, you have to have some restrictions on expectations. So they maybe have got to be inelastic expectations and so on. And it's not very clear why in a world in which all prices are flexible, you should have inelastic expectations, because that implies that there's some normal level to which the prices are going to enter. It's not necessarily why in a world in which prices can move around anywhere, there should be any inelastic expectations unless some prices are fixed. Now Keynes followed that track. As a matter of fact, both Marx and Keynes were aware of the fact that if you have the value of money determined by demand and supply, and think in terms of a market system with money exactly as functioning like a market system where demand and supply basically bring about a set of prices at which excess demand is zero, if you think of it that way, then there's a problem. And therefore, both Marx and Keynes followed a different track, which is why in my book I call it the Marx-Keynes tradition. I should say that because I call it the Marx-Keynes tradition, a whole lot of people were very angry with me and said he's actually a Keynesian masquerading as a Marxist. I'm very grateful to Moshumi in her write-up in that souvenir that she actually calls me a Marxist economist. So, I should not go into Marx's discussion of it, but let's look at Keynes' discussion. Keynes said that, look, yes, of course, the value of money is something which is not determined by demand and supply, but basically it suggests that the value of money is determined by the fact that money wages are given in the short run and they change only slowly over time. Now, if that is the case, then you have a certain comparability between money on the one hand and commodities on the other, and the comparability is independent of demand and supply. Now, of course, when Keynes said that this is the case, he actually introduced a whole new world, very exciting world, because from this it follows that if the money wage is given, then if you have a rise in investment and aggregate demand, then what he called profit inflation took place. If you had a fall in the level of aggregate demand, then there would be some adjustment in prices, but also an adjustment in output, therefore you have involuntary unemployment. So the whole idea of profit inflation taking place in the boom when you have more or less reached full capacity, and recession taking place because of fall in aggregate demand was introduced by Keynes. And it was an extraordinarily exciting world to which he opened up economics. It had very important, of course, philosophical and other consequences, which I did not go into. And Keynes actually said, as most of you know, that that the stability of money wages as opposed to real wages is a condition for the stability of the capitalist system. That the fixity of money wages as opposed to real wages is a condition for the stability of the capitalist system. But of course, when you go into the question, why should money wages be constant? And why should they be fixed? In other words, why should they be fixed in the short run and slowly changing over time? Keynes really did not provide an answer. There was some reference to money illusion, but that was intellectually so poor that it actually allowed a chance for monetarism to come back, all this naive and so on. Basically, it was an attack, a very easy attack. The target was very easy to attack of Keynes' ideas of a money illusion. That workers, I suppose everybody knows the money illusion, that the workers really look at their money wages, they don't look at their real wages, and that they suffer from this illusion of being money fixated, and which is why as long as the money wages are given, even if aggregate demand rises, and therefore prices rise relative to money wages, they don't bother about the real wages, they are still money wage fixated. And there's something which, of course, the monetarists then came back saying, how can this be? And the workers not only are not money wage fixated, but they learn over time to anticipate inflation, and if that is the case, then there is only one unique level of unemployment at which the economy can stabilize with a non-accelerating rate of inflation. So Keynes really didn't have an answer. He talked about, as I said, money illusion, and also it's unrealistic. Not only is it unrealistic because of the fact that workers learn, they're not stupid, and also it's unrealistic because if you're talking about long booms, let's say like the boom from the middle of the 19th century right until the First World War, long booms in which, according to Keynes, there should be substantial profit inflation. This substantial profit inflation, where prices rise a great deal relative to money wages, it would be absurd to imagine that during this, money wages remain unchanged, that workers do not demand higher money wages. Now the answer, which actually was provided by others, which can be provided, is that no, it's not the money illusion, it's actually the existence of unemployment, or what Marx had called the reserve army of labor. Kalitsky wrote an article, in 1943, Political Aspects of Full Employment. Apparently, when that article was sent to Keynes, he sent a little note to Kalitsky saying, what a brilliant article you've written. So Keynes would have not having averse, and Kalitsky's article talked about the existence of the necessity of a reserve army of labor for the capitalist system, that even when you have full capacity use, there would be a substantial amount of unemployment, which is necessary not only to keep wage demand in check, but it is also necessary to ensure discipline as far as the workers are concerned. But you see, the reserve army of labor idea is something which typically was used by Marx, and if you like, the legitimate use of it is to explain that workers' bargaining strength gets limited because the reserve army is very large. If the reserve army is large, their bargaining strength is limited. If the reserve army is small, their bargaining strength improves. But bargaining strength for what? It's really for real wages. I mean, if you look at Marx, the real wages depend upon the reserve army of labor. That really, the workers' bargaining strength reflects itself in terms of the amount of real wages they get vis-a-vis productivity, or if you like, the share of wages, but not with respect to their money wages. Now, you can have the same level of real wages either with money wages constant and prices at an appropriate level, or prices constant and money wages at an appropriate level. Therefore, the reserve army idea does not explain the fixity of money wages that Keynes adduced as an explanation for the stability of the capitalist system, for the fact that the market mechanism functions as long as this particular one price is given. The question is, why is it given? How is it given? And of course, as far as that is concerned, Keynes' answer was no good, and I believe even adducing unemployment for the reserve army of labor is something which would not be adequate, which would not really work. What then can one say about it? I believe that actually when you are thinking in terms of the fact that money wages do not change over long periods of time, or do not change so rapidly over long periods of time, which is an observed phenomenon, which is what basically got Keynes started. The reason for that lies in the fact that capitalist booms are associated not so much to profit inflation, but in terms of really taking away resources from the working people in general by other means. Usta has used the term income deflation. I think the idea of imposing an income deflation over large segments of the working population really is in a way a substitute for profit inflation, that you can actually keep money wages constant, prices rise, real wages fall, thereby more becomes available as far as the capitalists are concerned, so that more savings get generated to match investment. Alternatively, you can keep money wages where they are, you can even keep prices where they are, provided you can actually suck resources away by some other means, in which case you would have been able to explain the stability of the capitalist system, the stability of money wages, and the functioning of the market, but at the same time by bringing in another dimension, which is this income deflation. Now, typically the income deflation that was imposed by capitalism was, of course, on the colonies. It was imposed in the form of taxation. It was imposed in the form of the creation of a massive unemployment as far as the colonial countries are concerned, colonies, semi-colonies, and so on, including China. And it was imposed in the form of deindustrialization, all of which meant that there was, as it were, a release of resources as far as the working population is concerned from what it was absorbing in order to be taken away for the purposes of investment during the long boom of the 19th century. Now, this income deflation, of course, was primarily, it primarily took the form of a taxation system, colonial taxation system, and the colonial taxation system really implied that huge amounts of resources were just taken away. And that contributed to the stability of money wages under capitalism. Because if resources are being taken away like this, then there is no reason why there should be any substantial profit inflation, and there is no reason why the working class should then rise up in resistance. As a matter of fact, it was not, I mean, it's quite interesting that during the long boom of the 19th century, lasting right up to the First World War, there was no significant improvement in the terms of trade for food, primary commodities, raw materials which were produced in the colonies, in the Third World countries. On the contrary, what you had originally was really a secular decline. I'm not even talking about the Depression years, when of course everybody knows terms of trade moved against primary commodities. But you take the period up to the First World War, the boom period ending at the First World War, and you find that initially there was a secular decline in the terms of trade, but in the run-up to the war, there is an improvement in the terms of trade. Even so, if you take 1913 as 100, you take the average terms of trade for 1883 to 1913, that is 30 years, then the average works out to 98. In other words, roughly speaking, 1913, remember, is actually more or less the peak of this phase when terms of trade started improving for primary commodities. So it follows that if you take the entire period, there was no significant movement in the terms of trade in favor of primary commodities, which there should have been because capitalism was actually experiencing its enormously long boom from the middle of the 19th century right until the First World War. Income deflation not only explains, therefore, the fact that no shortage of food and raw materials was actually experienced in capitalist countries to bid up their prices and therefore to bring about a profit inflation with given money wages, which would have been destabilizing for the system, but also explains something else. And that consists in the fact that you have, it's an interesting thing. If you have if you have a world in which the manufacturing sector, industry is growing rapidly, but agriculture is not. In that case, you would normally expect that the terms of trade should move in favor of agriculture. You should normally expect that there should be some kind of a crisis that would be generated. In fact, Ricardo had anticipated that. He had actually said that industry or manufacturing would keep growing, but poor agriculture is subject to diminishing returns. As a result, there would be a crisis generated, a falling rate of profit that would push the economy to the stationary state. Even Nicholas Caldo, writing as late as, I suppose, 1978 or something, says that the real problem with the Walrasian equilibrium is that agriculture cannot grow in the same way that industry can because it's subject to diminishing returns. But we have had in the world a situation where there has been significant growth as far as the industrial sector of the world is concerned, but on the other hand, there has been virtual stagnation as far as the non-industrial, the primary commodity sector of the world is concerned. And that's why we have this uneven development with third world countries experiencing, until very recently, almost virtual stagnation. So much so that everybody is familiar with the long debates that took place in India about whether national income was growing or not. So the point is that the fact that you have a long period when national income or output or whatever is stagnant in third world countries, but on the other hand, capitalism is bringing about substantially high rates of growth in the first world countries, not as high as China and India and so on are experiencing now, but nonetheless high by any standard, including historical standards. This is possible, and this happens without even any significant shift in the terms of trade in favor of primary commodities because of the imposition of income deflation. That means you can have a sector that is stagnant, but you can keep sucking more and more resources out of that sector by imposing taxes, by imposing income deflation on the producers of that sector. And the point of all this that I would therefore like to end up with is the following: that actually, I think it's very important, of course, to study the markets, but I think it's very important to see that the entire market system is superimposed upon a network of other relations. There are all kinds of arrangements that capitalism makes, including the arrangement that colonialism represented, upon which the markets are superimposed. What economics has traditionally done is to ignore these arrangements and only look at the functioning of the markets and to claim that it is that which actually makes the system tick. What I would suggest is that, as a matter of fact, it's time that we started looking at these arrangements, which they don't recognize in the advanced countries, but we at least must